They told you poverty begins when you run out of money. But that's not true. Poverty begins much earlier, when you still had clothes on your back, food on your plate, and a roof over your head. It starts the moment you swallow a lie so small you barely notice it. That's not for people like us. Don't aim too high. Be grateful for what you have. These words don't hit you like a slap. They slip in like a whisper. And that whisper, it doesn't just die off, it multiplies, until it becomes a voice inside your head. A voice that sounds a lot like your own, but it isn't. This voice will tell you not to apply, not to ask, not to raise your hand. It'll dress itself in humility, in realism, in being practical. But make no mistake, it's fear. It's resignation passed down like an heirloom, a legacy wrapped not in wealth, but in warnings. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Your financial situation is not just about your job or your salary. It's about an invisible program that you never chose, a mental script that was installed in your childhood, handed to you by people who never questioned it either. It doesn't show up on your bank statement. It shows up every time you lower your voice so others don't feel uncomfortable. Every time you tell yourself, I should just be grateful. Every time you stop yourself from dreaming because it feels dangerous. Let me ask you, do you remember the first time you asked for something big and someone told you, that's not for you? Do you remember the look in their eyes? It wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear that if you tried and failed, you'd be hurt. Fear that if you succeeded, you'd leave them behind. Fear that dreaming too big would make you look foolish. That fear wasn't yours, but you inherited it, and you made it your compass. Now you think you're making smart decisions. But what if those decisions are based on a fiction? A story someone else wrote for you. A story where your role is to settle, to obey, to never stand out. This story is the real poverty, because it doesn't just limit your wallet. It limits your identity. It tells you who you are, what you deserve, and where your ceiling is. And the worst part? You believe it. You tell yourself you're not good enough, not smart enough, not connected enough. And you believe it so deeply that when an opportunity does show up, you sabotage it, because deep down, you don't think it's yours to claim. And let me tell you something that might sting. This system of poverty, it needs you. It needs you to stay small. It needs you to obey. It needs you to feel guilty for wanting more. Because if you stop apologizing, if you stop settling, if you stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's version of realistic, then you become dangerous. Because you will no longer feed the machine that profits off your obedience. You see, poverty doesn't perpetuate itself. It needs your cooperation. Every morning, you wake up thinking, this is just how life is. You're reinforcing the walls of your mental prison, and that's the real trap. It's not built with bricks. It's built with beliefs. So I'm asking you now, are you willing to look in the mirror and admit that many of your decisions weren't made freely, that they were scripted for you by voices that feared freedom more than failure? Because if you can say yes, then you've just taken the first step out of the narrative. You weren't born poor. You were trained to think poor. And now you can choose to break the training. You were taught about money before you ever touched a dollar. Not through lectures, not through textbooks, but through glances at the dinner table, through the way your parents spoke when the bills came, through silence when someone mentioned rich people, through nervous laughter when the rent was due. You absorbed every second. And without knowing it, you downloaded a financial identity, an identity that says, money is hard. People like us never get ahead. Rich people must have done something shady. Don't expect too much, or you'll be disappointed. These weren't just beliefs. They were survival codes, and your nervous system treated them as truth. So now, as an adult, you don't need anyone to hold you back. You do it yourself, flawlessly. You say no to yourself before the world ever gets a chance. You don't ask for that raise. You don't launch that idea. You don't invest in your growth. Because in the background, an old program runs. That's not who I am. That's for other people. I'm not ready. Let's be real. How many times have you sabotaged your own progress? Not because you lacked ability, but because deep down you felt like an imposter. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Because here's the truth. We don't just inherit eye color or cheekbones. We inherit beliefs, and unless we question them, we become a living echo of someone else's fear. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Was the person who taught you about money free? Did they speak about it with ease, joy, confidence? Or did they speak with stress, scarcity, shame? Because if they weren't free, then what you inherited wasn't wisdom. It was a wound. You were handed a worldview shaped by survival. And you've been trying to thrive inside it, wondering why it feels like every step forward triggers guilt. This is why budgeting isn't enough. Why vision boards aren't enough. Because if your subconscious believes money is dangerous, every action you take to grow will activate resistance. You'll start a business, and then procrastinate. You'll raise your prices, and then apologize for them. You'll attract opportunity, and then sabotage it, because your nervous system doesn't trust abundance. It only trusts the familiar, even if the familiar is struggle. And here's the part most people miss. Poverty is not just financial. It's emotional. It's generational. It's neurological. It's the ache in your stomach when the topic of money comes up. It's the way you shrink in meetings. It's the guilt you feel for wanting more. You call it humility. But it's really unhealed shame, dressed in good manners. And the system we live in, it thrives on that shame, because people who feel guilty don't ask for more. They accept crumbs. They stay silent. They stay small. This is not an accident. This is programming. You were not born to feel small, but you were trained to associate power with danger, visibility with arrogance, abundance with selfishness. That's why every time you try to step into more, something in you freezes. And that's something? It's not laziness. It's a trauma response. So how do you break it? Not with more hustle, not with more punishment, but with compassion, with awareness, with a new script. Here's a truth you were never told. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to enjoy wealth. You're allowed to thrive without guilt. You don't need permission. You need a new identity. And that identity begins the moment you stop calling survival normal, the moment you stop making excuses for the inherited stories that don't belong to you, because if you don't rewrite your story, you'll unconsciously pass it on to your children, to your team, to your community. Cycles don't stop with time. They stop with truth. What nobody explained to you is that emotional poverty thrives because it turns learning into condemnation, because they made you believe that when you fail, you stop deserving respect, and with every mistake, your dignity is reduced a little more. They engraved in you that if you don't get it right the first time, then you confirm that your ambition is ridiculous. Does that sound familiar? Of course it does. You've lived it so many times, you don't even question it anymore. And meanwhile, those you admire, those who live as you dream, have spent their whole lives failing with a boldness you have never allowed yourself even once, because they learned something you were never taught. Failure is not proof of your smallness, but evidence that you are moving. Every mistake you collect takes you one step further from the ignorance you were born into. True poverty, the most devastating kind, is not lack of resources. It is the inability to take risks. And that inability was not born with you. It was implanted. They convinced you that error is a contagious disease, that your duty is to live in quarantine, far from anything that might expose you, that safety is more noble than trying. That's how they raise the obedient. That's how they guarantee you'll never try anything that threatens those who profit from your silence. Think for a moment about all the ideas you aborted before they even saw the light. Think about the projects you abandoned because you imagined others laughing. Think about the times you decided not to speak, not to ask, not to share your opinion out of fear of confirming you were ignorant. That endless list, that's not weakness. That's the inventory of your mental poverty. And if you have the courage to look at it squarely, maybe for the first time, you will understand that error was never your enemy. Your real enemy is the poison that turns curiosity into humiliation, the virus that makes you associate visibility with vulnerability, effort with embarrassment, progress with punishment. It's not that you lack the ability to try. It's that you were taught trying makes you laughable. Let me ask you, when did effort become something to be mocked? Probably around the time you raised your hand and got laughed at for not knowing the answer. Or when your voice trembled during a presentation and they said, "You're so awkward," or when you tried to sing, write, draw, dance, speak, and someone crushed it in the name of being honest. So now you've learned to protect yourself from disappointment by never daring, by becoming your own censor before anyone else can criticize you. You reject yourself before anyone else gets the chance, and you call that humility. But humility is not self-erasure. Humility is not deciding in advance that you are unworthy of being seen. That is fear, disguised as modesty. Every genius you admire today once sounded ridiculous. Every leader you respect once stumbled in public. Every creator you follow once made something embarrassingly bad. What separates them from the rest is not perfection. It's permission. They gave themselves permission to be seen growing. And growth, by definition, is awkward, clumsy, incomplete. They were willing to look foolish. Are you? This is the quiet violence of emotional poverty. It keeps you hidden from your own evolution. It teaches you that to protect yourself is to avoid the mirror. And so you stay small. You stay silent. You stay safe. But safe is not alive. Safe is the coffin of unrealized dreams. And here's the truth no one told you. You're allowed to be seen mid-process. You're allowed to be both learning and visible. You're allowed to make a mess before it becomes a masterpiece. You're allowed to say, I don't know, and not be ashamed. You're allowed to fall and not lose your worth. That's how you build emotional wealth. Not by eliminating failure, but by refusing to confuse it with shame. So here's your invitation. Reclaim your errors. Honor your confusion. Celebrate your curiosity. And when fear rises, and it will, don't run from it. Ask it, who taught you I wasn't allowed to grow? Because once you stop fearing failure, you stop being poor. And for the first time, you begin to live. You've been living under a silent contract. You didn't sign it consciously, but you've followed its terms all your life. It says, you're only worthy if you succeed quickly. You're only lovable if you avoid mistakes. You're only valuable if you don't inconvenience anyone. You must be competent, calm, agreeable, and always in control, or you lose your place in the tribe. This contract was written in fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being ridiculed, fear of being rejected by the very people whose love you once needed for survival. But here's the truth Jung knew and tried to show the world. Every human being carries within them two versions of self. One that performs to be accepted, and one that longs to be whole, and until you break that contract, you'll keep choosing performance over authenticity. You'll smile when you want to scream. You'll agree when you want to walk away. You'll nod while dying inside. And every time you do that, the real you gets smaller. That's the poverty nobody sees. Not financial, but existential. To live every day as someone you're not. To keep pleasing, proving, performing, until you've forgotten what your real voice even sounds like. Carl Jung didn't want you to become better at pretending. He wanted you to remember who you were before the pretending began. He called it individuation, the painful, beautiful, liberating process of becoming yourself fully and without apology. It means you stop outsourcing your worth to achievement. It means you stop shrinking to make others comfortable. It means you stop mistaking people-pleasing for love. And it starts with a new contract. Let's write it together. Your new contract. I am allowed to be seen learning. I am allowed to be respected even when I'm not performing. I do not owe perfection to be worthy. My mistakes are part of my education, not a reason to disappear. I will no longer trade authenticity for approval. I will outgrow roles that shrink me. I will forgive myself loudly and publicly. I will show others what it looks like to evolve in real time. This is the new wealth. Being fully yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable, because someone is watching you right now, not to judge you, but to find permission in your courage. You showing up imperfectly could be the spark for someone else's freedom. You speaking honestly could be the voice they needed to stop hiding. You failing publicly might be the mirror that tells them it's safe to try. You are not here to perform resilience. You are here to live it, and resilience doesn't look like stoic silence. It looks like shaking and speaking anyway, like crying and continuing, like being misunderstood and still not erasing yourself. So the next time you feel poor, emotionally, socially, creatively, ask yourself, am I really poor or am I just in hiding? Because the more you show up, the less poor you become. And one day, you'll look back and realize what looked like failure was actually a kind of wealth. What looked like loss was the start of your return. What looked like weakness was your initiation into becoming whole. So stand up, speak up, mess up, again and again, until your very existence becomes proof that the richest life isn't the cleanest, it's the most honest.